Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions. I am Debra Maldonado.
I'm Dr. Rob.
And we're with CreativeMind. This is a Jungian coaching podcast, and we are talking all things Jungian, neuroscience, and the beautiful Eastern philosophy. But today we're continuing our series on neuroscience and the mind and mindset, and we're talking about this concept called the observer effect, which is really juicy and cool. So I can't wait to dive in. Before we do, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're listening to us on one of the podcast services. And if you're watching us on YouTube, there's a button in the corner that you can click to subscribe to our channel so you can help us get more people and ears and eyes onto this great content.
Yeah, we got a mouthful here.
Yeah, a mouthful.
Embodied consciousness and the observer effect. And then we'll talk about Jungian coaching and the path to intentional living through self-directed neuroplasticity.
That is a mouthful. So basically, we're saying how to get out of the old patterns and create what you want in a nutshell.
Yeah, because last time we talked about how we project a lot of let's say what we experience is a lot of what our assumptions are, and that occurs through projection. We project our assumptions out into the world, and then that's what we see. But it appears to us to be independent, that whatever showed up for us was independent of our mind. We had nothing to do with it. It simply, that's the way it showed up, and it's outside. That is an illusion. And this is verified by neuroscience as well as quantum mechanics and physics and all this stuff now. In other words, this is not new age thinking. This is actual scientific thought.
And so when we create what we see, a lot of what we expect to see, if we're running from the default, if we've not evolved ourselves and done any deep introspection and deep work with the unconscious, we by default will focus on what is going to help us survive. That's just how the brain is wired for survival. And so that's what we talked about last time. But there's also this really amazing idea of just what we see in the world, not just what we fear, but just our conceptions of what's out there is what we expect to see is what we see.
So first of all, embodied consciousness. What the hell is that?
What does that mean, Rob?
So embodied consciousness, right? We see it or we take the clue from embodied, meaning we're focusing in on the way we exist in this world, kind of taking the perspective of the body. We feel ourselves to be inside our body, perhaps inside our head, kind of looking outward at the world, right? So that's the embodied consciousness, that we feel this, the qualia, the qualities of our experience to be referenced from the point of view of the I.
So the individual consciousness or the sense of separation, would you say?
Yeah, there is a sense of separation because when we're looking at an object, it appears to be separate from the I, right? The ego, the I that is in me is the observer, and the object is the observed.
And the embodied consciousness is the one that sees it as separate.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Embodied consciousness sounds so like evolved, but it's actually not.
Well, it takes a little bit. Yeah, it takes a little bit to get there because most people don't even think about what is it that I'm experiencing, right? They just assume I'm looking out at the world and the world is out there.
They don't think their mind has anything to do with it. Yeah,
exactly. And so what is? Well, let's take a stab at quantum mechanics first. And this is we're not physicists or anything like that, so.
I was in a past life.
You were?
Yeah.
So we can go by what the good science writers tell us that quantum physicists are up to, right, and what they've found. So one of them is called the observer effect. And what this means in a nutshell, right, this is very simplified, but in a nutshell, it essentially says that the universe exists as infinite potential out there. Think of it as a wave. It's a wave of infinite potential that's not defined in any way.
It doesn't have name and form.
It doesn't have any form, doesn't have any structure to it. When we observe it, when there's an observer, it collapses into the shapes and forms that we experience as things in the world, right, as the world. So that's the observer effect. In other words, that the observer is actually creating or co-creating the reality, or what we call our reality.
And so that means for us is that what we see is our collapsed limitation of our expectation of what to expect in the world, but we think it's like fate, or we think it's something external from us. And so understanding this idea is that we are infinite potential, that we just have to change what we observe, or how we observe, or how we work with our mind. And so this, your thoughts and feelings create your life. Is that kind of the idea?
Pretty much, yeah. Because when we say what we expect to see, what are those expectations, right? And how do they appear to us in our mind? They appear to us as thoughts and emotions. That, I've had a certain experience. I've learned about things in a certain way, and I think of myself in a certain way. Those are the fundamentals then that I use to create my expectations. Like, what do I expect the world to give me? Or what do I expect to experience as I go out into the world? Those expectations then are translated into what I call my human experience.
So when I was doing love coaching many, many years ago, I have a lot of women that had this fear of like trusting a man, because their father left them, or their father was not nice to them, or their father was unreliable or not around. And so they go out and date, and then they start having these experiences with men who let them down, who disappoint them. And so then it kind of creates that expectation of, this one's going to disappoint me again. And so they start dating like a nice guy, and then they start looking for evidence in that person of them like either cheating, or that, they're kind of being hyper vigilant around like, how much do I open up? And they're not really themselves. And then so they create this, like almost like that person becomes someone you can't trust, even though they could be like the most trustworthy person, but they're projecting all that onto that person. Or they'll end up being in those relationships because they end up experiencing what they believe is going to happen. And I keep repeating the same pattern. I keep repeating the same pattern.
That's right.
And so that's what you were saying, is that we have this potential to be in this great relationship, but our mind collapses it into our past experience, and just, it puts it like, I was like on those paper dolls that you put little tabs. It's like that person's playing, but you put your own paper doll on them, and they become what you expect them to be.
Yes, and neurologically or neuropsychologically, what's going on is that our brain is designed to show us those expectations. In other words, to pick out the elements of the environment that match those expectations and focus in on them. In other words, kind of bring them out of the noise of the background and say, this is what is important about this situation. But if we don't understand, right, we think, oh, we're seeing something that is already kind of out there, independent of me, and it's showing me what is important and what is real, instead of understanding that, no, it's showing you what you expect to see, what is important to you, what you're kind of emphasizing as your potential.
Well, that quote from Jung, which says, you ask the world who we are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you, but it actually is your mind is the world that you see is going to tell you but you think it's separate, and that it really is that projection. And it's interesting too that that's why we repeat patterns, is because we get almost expect it to happen, and then it does, and then do we unconsciously make choices that lead to destructive, like sabotaging things because we expect it to not work out anyway, so we sabotage?
Yeah, we can go down the tubes that way, right? Because
the tubes.
Yeah, because it confirms it. So
Yeah.
if I go, let's say I go to a new job and I expect to have a terrible time at it, and I expect to be dissatisfied, and I expect to be underpaid, and I expect to be fired or whatever it is, right? The situation is going to show me those things. In other words, I'm going to be creating them in a very direct way, but it's going to appear to me as if it's coming from out there. So it's going to validate my assumptions, but I'm going to think, you see, I was right. I had nothing to do with it. I simply walked into the situation and it confirmed my deepest fears, my beliefs. And therefore it takes me one notch lower now. Now I'm saying everything I do turns out badly. Everything doesn't work out for me, and I'm a terrible person, or the world is a terrible place. And guess what? Now the world is going to show me. Now that deeper assumption of badness is going to appear to me as my reality.
Like no one likes me. People are mean. People are cheats. People will break my heart. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But we think, but look at Deb, the evidence, like the men out there, they all want a woman that's 10 years younger. They all want this, this type of person. And, you don't understand. No one wants to commit anymore. I've heard every story. And it's really hard for us because we're so trained in early life in the world to think the outside is separate, that it takes a discipline and study to really activate that belief in us that we are creating it. And it really, but once we do, everything starts to shift. If you accept that, I'm contributing to this result I'm getting, then that means you can contribute to another result that you want.
So the witness mind is one of the ways we can break the pattern. The witness mind is, in some psychology, it's called metaconsciousness or meta-awareness, metacognition as well. Metacognition, we can think of it as the brain's ability to observe its own functions. In other words, there's a part of your brain that can look into what other parts of the brain are doing and observe them. So we can test this right now. I think we did it in the first chapter of the series. But think of a rhinoceros. Just imagine a rhinoceros in your mind right now. Then the next question is, can you see it? Can you see the rhinoceros I instructed you to imagine? If you say yes, that there was a different part of your brain that was looking at your imagination and verifying, yes, I see it. Or
so
no,
there's the imaginer and the experiencer, and then the one watching the experiencer.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's metacognition. That's metaconsciousness. That's meta-awareness.
The witness mind.
Or the witness mind in Eastern philosophy, the witness mind. In other words, the mind is witnessing its own thoughts, its own emotion, its own imagination. It can also witness, of course, your own behaviors, your own moral feelings about things. That's a very powerful mechanism that we have that most of us do not cultivate.
Well, we're like kind of like on autopilot most of the time, and we're not aware of ourselves and aware of the thoughts and aware of the way we're doing. Like it's almost like taking a step back and like watching this character have this life and be aware. And there's some brain some things that happens to the brain when we get there. And according to Craig in 2009, he said it strengthens the neocortex activity and enhancing somatic awareness and emotional intelligence. and making individuals better observers of their own emotional patterns and allowing for conscious choices instead of automatic reactions.
Yes, because what it shows you is that there's a higher part of the mind that can instruct the other parts in a better way. In other words, there's an internal teacher, an internal guide that can give you feedback on what you're experiencing instead of buying into this idea that whatever thought I have must be real and therefore I'm going to go with it. We don't have to do that, right? If we use the witness mind, we can say, that's not a very good thought, or that thought, we can counteract that thought with something better, more creative, that has more potential. And that gives us the ability then to monitor our own thoughts, emotions, actions in a much more powerful way. Now, it does take some work to cultivate it. In other words, to strengthen that ability of metacognition. You have to practice it. You have to, just like meditation, just like martial arts or yoga, it requires some discipline to do it.
And it's such a simple thing to do. I remember about a couple of months ago, we went through a big change in our company. We did a lot of restructuring. And so it was a lot of stress for me, a lot of people and, have to deal with and emotions. And I was laying in bed one night and it was a little overwhelming. And I was just like, oh my God, this is a lot. When you go to the next level, there was always something that you have to deal with. And I remember just thinking, going into the witness mind and just observing, not doing anything, not trying to change it, but just being like, remember the witness, I'm watching my mind. And immediately I became relaxed. I remembered who I was, what my center of power was, and it just completely shifted. My whole experience went right to sleep. So it's such a powerful thing to practice. It's just watching yourself. You don't even have to really change, because by observing it, there's something magical that happens, because the part that's witnessing is, think of it as your higher intelligence. And so it's almost like infusing this old story, these old patterns with wisdom. And so it's like we talked about in our last session, purifying the mind. It's a purification, and there's something really beautiful about that process.
It is. And what it does, it gives us a little detachment or non-attachment to our thoughts and emotions, where we can then evaluate them instead of buying into them and being carried away by them. Right? We're caught up in our human experience. Metacognition allows us that space to observe and to say, maybe I don't need to do that right now. Right? I can postpone it or put it on the back burner for now.
Another question you can ask is, isn't it curious that my mind is worried about this right now? I wonder what that's about. And it's just like, oh. And so let's talk about Jungian coaching and how we work with the mind. How do we use that relaxed state, that observer mind, in a very creative way? And Jung came up with this beautiful process called active imagination. And active imagination is a way to, it's like a breaking up the pattern. It's inviting this creative, intuitive part of us and inviting more of the unconscious. The way we see the unconscious, and Jung saw the unconscious, is not as a repository, like a program, like rewiring, but the unconscious is alive. And there's more to us than just those pre-programmed fear-based responses. There's this wisdom within us. And so as we step into this witness mind, and then we use an active imagination, we start to stimulate and have access to our deeper wisdom, our creativity, intuition, and something really powerful happens in those states where we could actually redirect and be almost like taking back the driver's seat of our life versus allowing it to run on default. The original programming, out of the box programming, the default, we get to upgrade our software into something more conscious and more profound that we can embody. So do you want to talk about some of the ways we use active imagination? Or?
Yeah, so like we were saying, Most of us, what we're doing when we are acting unconsciously, right, or just kind of going about our daily life, we're projecting our past conditioning onto the present moment. In other words, infinite potential is collapsed into our past experiences through projection. What we're doing through this witness mind, this metacognition, is understanding that we can observe our own thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, not in a critical way, but simply by observing, like you say, something magical happens.
You get curious.
And also that we're freed from the observer effect, that we're no longer just embodied in that I ego function. We can now observe that ego function and decide from a higher place whether it's something we want to do or not. In other words, we're directing it from a much higher place.
And here's a really great example of active imagination. So we have people like pull up a symbol from their unconscious, and then they start to observe themselves, observing the symbol, look at emotions around it, what associations they have of it, and get to change that symbol. And it seems like a simple thing to do, right? Anyone can do this. But what's happening on a really profound level is that we are training your mind to say, I can change reality. I can change the symbol. I can make it what I want it to be. And a lot of times it's not actual change itself, but the client having that experience and understand, and then what comes up during that experience is it won't change. It turns into something dark and I can't make it positive, or they see their own like judgments of if they can't change a symbol in their imagination, then they're not able to believe that they can change things in the outer world. So it's kind of like a practice, almost like a little inner workshop that they do to cultivate that talent, that skill to know that you can effectuate change. And when you start to interact with these symbols and images from the unconscious, you start to like build that muscle of, I have power to change things. And then it actually rewires you in a way to believe that. So it's not just rewiring that conditioning, but rewiring the way you actually see yourself.
Yes, because once you understand what you're experiencing, in other words, you're no longer caught up in your own projections. You understand that what I'm experiencing as the world is really my mind. That means you can intervene in that equation and insert the possibilities that you want to see. And we do that through our imagination. And that's what Jung called active imagination. That active imagination is our ability to reimagine, reconfigure our reality in a new potential, as new possibilities, as something completely new that has never existed before in our lives or in the world. And that, when we start to do that, we're fulfilling our higher purpose. Because if you think about a bird, it's designed to fly. We've all seen seagulls on the beach. They simply open their wings and they take off. They don't even have to flap their wings sometimes. It's just the wind, the way they're designed picks them up. They're fulfilling their mission, right, of being a bird. Now we ask, what is the purpose of a human being? What are we designed for? We're designed to create. Like, we have this
designed to fly.
Yeah, we're designed to imagine, to create, to be these creative beings that create the world in our own image. That power is expressed through active imagination, but we have to understand, what is it that we're experiencing? What is the nature of our mental human experience? And it is that we're creating our own reality. Then our imagination becomes the new things that we want to create in our lives. So we imagine them, we bring them into being by imagination, or what we call ideas, or higher still, what we call our vision. When we have a vision, it's something very powerful, right? That we know we have to make this dream come true. This is our purpose. This is what we're here for.
And we see it so clearly in our imagination that like it's almost like you know it's real. Like it's so real that when you open your eyes and see the world and think, this isn't the real thing. Like you believe what's in your mind and what's in your vision versus what your senses are showing you, and you're overriding that. So let's talk about self-directed neuroplasticity. That's really what we're talking about. Like we talked about neuroplasticity 2 episodes ago. If you want to go back and listen to that one, really good episode on just how the brain has an ability to learn and rewire itself. So self-directed means that we're not just passively, letting our brain do it itself, but we're actually deriving the neuroplasticity or directing the neuroplasticity.
Yes, again, because if we think of the brain as the hardware, and the mind, what we call the mind, including our thoughts and visions and our emotions, as the software, right? It's the programs that are being run in the hardware. Now the software is actually modifying the hardware and expanding it and growing it and rewiring it, like we say, right? Now that ability is amazing, right? It's like you can change the structure of your body through your thoughts. But of course, it requires you to understand these principles and to embody them. If you don't understand them, or if you merely understand them intellectually, that won't do it, right? You won't be able to do that. But if you cultivate this witness mind, this self-awareness, this ability to observe your own thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, and then practice active imagination, visioning new possibilities, new potential in your life, then there's a pretty good chance you'll be able to do it, right? You'll be able to change your physical brain structures in a very active way. You'll be able to direct the living cells in your body to restructure themselves in new ways.
So it's almost like going to a new default, like when you load like an upgrade on your computer and the software, it's always the new program is running now. And so instead of just kind of changing thoughts and feelings, you're actually changing a way of how you see yourself, like almost like a self-perception and what's possible. It's not what you're thinking that you're changing, but you're changing how you think. And so you're training your mind to think differently, not in just the content, but how the world is. Where's the center of power? What's possible for me? Anything's possible. To get in that habit of actually thinking that anything's possible, because that's just the concept of life. Just like we at one point thought the world was flat, and everyone thought the world was flat, and we all operated from that assumption. Now we know the world is round. Well, there's still some flat earthers out there. We're going to leave that out for now. But there's like that concept of the world is round, and it becomes the new philosophy that we live by. So think about that most people are thinking the world is still flat when they think they're living in that conditioned response. That observer is just collapsing into what they expect. But the potential in us is to see the world as it truly is, which is pure potential. And it's how we start thinking about the world, not just what we're thinking, but how we're thinking.
So it's intentional personal development. Think about it that way, right? Intentional personal development. In other words, if you have a vision, let's say of something you want to create, you start to think, what are the qualities that I need to step into that potential and live out that reality? It's okay to say, I'm not there yet. I don't have those skills yet, but I understand that I can create them. I can intend them, and by intending them, envisioning them, and then practicing them, I can actually step into that role. And that's how we move forward, right? We're creating our own reality, our own destiny. Instead of letting the world tell us who we are, as Jung says, we are saying, I know who I am. And I know what I want to create.
Yeah. And I know I can create it. Yeah, beautiful. And I just love this. The bottom line I love that you just said earlier is that what are we made of? What's our purpose? Like the eagle's purpose is to fly. For us, the purpose is to become who we really are. I mean, that is our purpose. And we owe it to ourselves to live the most incredible life and free life. So I hope you enjoyed today. We have more to come on mindset coming in the next few episodes, some really great topics. And before you leave, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. If you are watching us on YouTube, if you are listening to us on the podcast services, subscribe to our podcast so you can get every episode. This series is really going to continue this conversation about the brain, the mind, consciousness, and how to live an incredible life.
Thanks for listening.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
See you soon.
Bye.